Hello everyone and welcome back once again to the NPC Dungeon. I don't have all that many announcements today, only that next week I will be releasing my episodes on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday and Saturday being my DM advice days, and Sunday being my D&D story day. But of course this week, as you probably already know, I released them all today on Friday. This week is going to be another one of those exceptions, just like last week. It ended up being kind of short, so only two this week. But without any further ado, let's start right up with the discussion and start talking about today's topic. It's one that really helps me keep my games kind of smooth, and it's just in general probably one of the most important things I can talk about as a DM, and it's all about knowing your players, so let's learn something. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what I mean when I say know your players. But before I get into that, I want to say that this topic I can very easily divide into two parts. The first is knowing your players as individual people who want to get certain things out of the game and maybe want to achieve certain things from the game, and about how you can use that to accommodate for and make sure that everyone's having fun. This will be the main point of today's episode. Obviously, you won't always know all of your players all that well, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a few tricks that I like to use for that every now and then. I'll kind of sprinkle that in whenever it comes into play in this episode today. And the second part of knowing your players is knowing them in terms of their characters. What I mean by this is how they're going to play a certain character so that you can be prepared for the kinds of stuff they might do. I'm not going to spend quite as much time on this point. I already covered it a lot on how I plan for and adapt to player decisions and chaos in other episodes in this series on running a smooth game, and in my episode on how I structure interesting, engaging encounters. Plus, I am planning on making a whole episode dedicated just to dealing with random player nonsense. What I'm probably going to do though is briefly mention this point every now and then throughout the course of this episode as it comes up and as it becomes appropriate, as there is also quite a bit of overlap between knowing your players as individual people and knowing how they'll play their characters, because knowing them helps you understand and know how they're going to play their characters. So it'll come up every now and then today anyway. So back to the first point for now. I did say that's the main point of today's episodes. So when I say know your players in that context, what do I mean? Well, in terms of knowing them as people, I'm referring to knowing what they want out of the game, like I said. I'm also referring to knowing what kinds of decisions they might make. That definitely helps you plan, but even that comes from what they want out of the game. That's the kind of scope of today's episode, knowing what they want out of the game, not planning for little player nonsense. I may not be speaking for everyone here, but I know that at least for me, when I'm playing as some character in a campaign, what I do comes down at least in part to what I want out of it. For example, if I want to play a more high-stakes stealth kind of game, I may take every opportunity to sneak around. If I want to play some political intrigue game, I may take a more diplomatic route. Obviously, we shouldn't do this as players at the expense of the game overall, at the expense of a DM's plans, or at the expense of the players, but we may look for opportunities to do these things, is what I'm trying to say, within the overall context of the overall game, of course. And you can probably already start to see how the ideas of knowing your players as people and knowing their characters are very related, and how that idea of knowing your players' characters might kind of come into play here. But today I'm talking about making sure you can try to fit as much as you can that all of your players want out of the game into the game. Obviously, you can't please everyone, nor should you try to please everyone, but making sure the game is fun for everyone at the table is a really good way to nullify and possibly even completely avoid some of those more chaotic situations you may find yourself in. So for now, let's focus on what you can do to set yourself up well for those kinds of situations. By the way, for more on setting yourself up, be sure to check out my episode on controlling the context of encounters, also in this series running a smooth game. But anyway, on to that first point. How can you set yourself up for these kind of situations by allowing your game to be fun for everyone at the table? Well, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier when I first mentioned the idea of knowing your players, knowing what they want out of the game. As a general rule, I try not to come up with anything too specific for the story until I have my players' characters. This gives me a chance to make sure that the story revolves around them. If the story is more about your players, they'll probably be more engaged, and the game will run a lot more smoothly. This is very important. If you only remember one thing from this episode, make sure that it's that. This also goes right along with making sure the game includes elements that your players might enjoy. Again, if your players have things in the game they like, they'll probably be more engaged, and you can use that to minimize any chance of your players getting bored, losing focus, and then getting distracted and going off the rails. As a quick side tangent here, I've heard horror stories on both ends. I've seen tables that just got out of control because the game wasn't engaging enough, and I've heard stories of tyrannical DMs who tried to solve that problem by force. Not only is that last one just plain wrong, remember we're playing a game here, it's not a job, but it's also just not that effective. The best strategy by far that I personally use is, again, making the game engaging by placing things in the game that your players will probably enjoy. Look, we all have to be willing to admit that sometimes sometimes our stories, even if we put a lot of work into them, just aren't that great. It happens. Take it from a writer. They can't all be winners. So what do? Simple. I just ask them. You might already have a good idea of what a given player might want if you know them, but it never hurts to ask. And like I said earlier, if you don't know them all that well, then definitely ask. What they want might depend kind of on the kind of game you're running. So you need to at least have a basic theme or concept ready. For example, my next campaign that I'm going to run is going to have a more cyberpunk criminal underground kind of feel. Knowing that, a player who might usually be into political intrigue might suddenly get more interested in a kind of smooth talking crime boss kind of thing. A player who likes to sneak may want to be a kind of burglar, and you can use that not only to help your game run smoothly, but also to generate ideas. But what about if all your players want different things? Well, that's the reality of it, because chances are they will. So on to my next point, working different players' wants together into the same game. Let's start with an example, and let's say that you have a player who just wants to run up and fight things. Let's say you have another player who likes tactics, one who likes the ability to solve puzzles and do random things, and let's say you have one more who just wants social interactions. That sounds fun, right? Well, yeah, actually. I ran a game just like this once, and I actually kind of enjoy working different wants into the game to see how the story morphs into what it becomes. And I'll give you an example of how I worked all this together. I made a kobold den with a few puzzles that the kobolds use to guard their treasure. I made plenty of combat, there's a big boss fight at the end, and the place itself was littered with traps and seemingly random kobold encounters, so they had plenty of time to think tactically in this weird cave terrain, and there were even a few odd characters to come across in this place. And this, obviously, isn't even the only way of combining these things. Maybe your players have to rescue an NPC, thus giving you an opportunity to combine tactics and character interactions, even with a little bit of possible combat. Or maybe a powerful NPC they have to impress pushes them through a trial that combines puzzles and combat. You even have the added bonus of a social interaction here as well. I'll tell you a little secret. You see, the vast majority of the encounters that you're going to make aren't just going to simply be one thing. They have all these different parts to them. It's all about taking and picking and choosing which encounters to have which parts. Seeing them this way and seeing them like this really helps. Otherwise, you may not have capitalized on that rescue mission I mentioned earlier to accommodate for the different things your players might want. Also, you're the one who makes these encounters, so you can modify them to have these different parts, just like I did earlier with the kobold example that I gave. But this doesn't just stop at the beginning. My next point is all about paying attention to your players throughout the game. I know I said this before on this show, but I'm going to say it again. You need to be constantly observing your players over the table and looking at the kinds of things they do and what they actually respond well to, as well as what they don't respond well to. If you give them an encounter that they all enjoy, they get excited for, and they love doing, maybe keep that in the back of your mind and use that in future encounters. If you run something that they get kind of bored with, they're kind of sluggish, that they don't seem to enjoy, maybe keep that in the back of your mind as well. And don't be afraid to talk to them. If you're not sure, or if they look like having fun or not having fun, don't be afraid to ask them. Don't be afraid to check in with them every now and then. I almost always ask my players how I did at the end of every session. I do this not only to get feedback on my style so that I can improve, but also so that I can make sure they're having fun, so that I can see if there's anything else that I need to do to make sure they can keep having fun. After all, the game is all about them. So check in with them, not just to see if they're having fun, but to see if there's anything that they want in the game that you can try to work in. See what's working for them, see what's not, and see what they enjoy. And for goodness sake, talk with them just to talk. You might be their DM, but chances are that you and your players are going to be spending a lot of time together. So if you don't know one or more of your players very well, just shoot the breeze with them. Have a conversation or two. Slow down, relax. After all, we're here to hang out, we're here to have fun, we're here to play a game. So you'll probably make plenty of friends this way if you haven't already. But as a secondary goal, it does help to know more about the people that you're running the game for so that you can run a better game for them. It's really a win-win situation. And as a last little point before I close up this episode, you might be thinking that all of this accommodation may take away from your creativity. Simple answer, no. No, it won't. I don't really see any reason why you can't typically combine your ideas with what your players want. For example, maybe your players want a dungeon crawl where they're just told to fight and they fight it, but you're better at cutthroat politics. Well, and this is just one solution, there are many, but as one solution, maybe there's a politician that orders a hit on a rival or something. Maybe your players have to kidnap an important figure or rescue an important figure who has been kidnapped. It all depends on that particular game you're playing and whether whether or not your players want to be the heroes or evil or whatever. And yes, in some specific situations or encounters, you may not be able to please everyone, and this includes you and what you want out of the game as a DM. Actually, it probably especially includes you as the DM, come to think of it, but broadly speaking, you can usually work most of it into the campaign. And real quick, obviously I'm not saying work every single little thing your players want into the campaign. That's just unrealistic and not possible. And if you have a player who wants you to work in every single little detail of their complicated 20-page backstory into the campaign, talk to them and tell them that it's just not possible. You need to be open and communicate with them about this kind of stuff, otherwise you're going to run into issues. Obviously don't be confrontational, but you can just let them know and move on. This game is for everyone, not just you, not just them. And that's it for this week's DM Advice episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out this week's other episode where I finish off a story from 2 weeks ago about a character named Luna, and come back next week for some very special episodes. I'm going to be talking all about prison breaks. My story will even be a prison break story from my current campaign. I hope this video was useful too, and as always, until next time, let's learn something.